Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the chilling world of vampire lore to uncover the most powerful bloodlines ever imagined. From ancient mythic clans whispered about in folklore to the legendary houses forged in modern fiction, these immortal dynasties have shaped centuries of fear, fascination, and supernatural storytelling. We'll explore their origins, signature powers, rivalries, and the dark secrets that make each lineage unforgettable. Whether you're a fan of classic tales or cinematic universes, prepare to meet the night's true elites. Let's step into the shadows and rank the ultimate vampire clans. Join us for the journey. The Strigoi, Romanian folklore. Romanian folklore contains one of the richest and most complex supernatural traditions in Europe, and among its most fascinating figures are the Strigoi, restless spirits or living witches who drain vitality from the living. While in popular imagination the Strigoi are often equated with vampires, their origins, behaviors, and symbolism reveal a broader and more nuanced character. They are not merely undead predators but embodiments of social anxieties, moral codes, and cultural memories stretching back to pre-Christian times. Understanding the Strigoi involves exploring the intersection of mythology, rural custom, religion, and communal fears surrounding death, the body, and the invisible world. Origins and etymology. The word Strigoi is generally linked to the Latin strix, meaning a screech owl or night bird associated with witchcraft and child-eating spirits in classical mythology. These Roman tales blended over centuries with Dacian, Slavic, and local Carpathian beliefs. The region was a cultural crossroads where Indo-European ancestral cults coexisted with Christian theology and medieval superstition. In this layered symbolic environment, the Strigoi evolved into a figure who could be simultaneously a ghost, a witch, an undead revenant, or a living person marked by supernatural afflictions. The earliest Romanian notions of the Strigoi likely came from animistic traditions that treated the soul as something vulnerable, detachable, and potentially dangerous when separated from the body. Before the widespread influence of Christianity, many communities believed that the dead could linger if burial rites were disturbed or if the individual had broken communal norms. These ancient religious insights, once transmitted orally, grew into the formal folklore scholars began recording in the 18th and 19th centuries. Types of Strigoi. Romanian folklore differentiates two major categories: Strigoi 7, the living Strigoi, and Strigoi Morti, the dead Strigoi. Strigoi 7, the living Strigoi. These are people believed to be born with certain signs or traits that predispose them to witch-like powers. Folkloric descriptions vary, but common markers include being born with a caul, with extra nipples, with a malformed spine, or as the seventh child of the same sex. In some regions, twins were suspected of having the ability to transcend their bodies at night and travel invisibly as animals or spectral doubles. The living Strigoi is fundamentally a person who leads an otherwise normal life but has the capacity, voluntarily or involuntarily, to harm others. At night, their spirit may leave their body, taking the form of a cat, fireball, or buzzing insect. They drain energy, milk from cows, fertility from crops, or vitality from neighbors, sometimes without conscious awareness. Communities viewed them with a mixture of fear and pity, believing that the condition might be inherited or imposed by fate. Strigoi Morti, the dead Strigoi. This category resembles the archetype of the vampire more closely. The dead Strigoi is a corpse that rises from its grave because its soul is unable or unwilling to rest. The reasons for such an inauspicious return range from improper burial rituals to immoral behavior during life, unresolved conflicts, violent death, or an inborn curse carried from the womb. Unlike ghosts, the Strigoi Morti possesses a physical presence. It can walk, attack livestock, suffocate sleeping villagers, or drink blood. Some accounts describe Strigoi returning for revenge on specific enemies or returning to their former households to drain the life of family members. A distinctive folkloric belief is that the Strigoi Morti does not always remain undead forever. Some tales depict them as gradually losing strength unless they continue feeding. Others note that a community, upon discovering the revenant, can perform rituals to neutralize or permanently destroy it. Signs, behaviors, and powers. The features attributed to Strigoi vary across Romania's diverse regions: Transylvania, Oltenia, Moldavia, Maramureș, but several key characteristics appear consistently. 1. Feeding on vitality. While modern pop culture focuses almost exclusively on blood drinking, Romanian tradition emphasizes vital energy theft. Strigoi drain life force in subtle ways, making infants weak, causing unexplained illness, spoiling butter, drying cows of milk, and spreading bad luck. Blood drinking exists in some regions, but the concept of energy vampirism is far older and more central. 2. Shape-shifting. Both living and dead Strigoi may take on forms including wolves, cats, dogs, birds, rats, or even spectral flames. This harks back to Indo-European shamanism, in which gifted individuals could traverse the spirit world using animal doubles. It also reflects rural anxieties about predators threatening livestock. Wolves and wild dogs were symbolically tied to death and chaos. 3. Nocturnal activity. Strigoi are most active at night, especially during liminal moments such as midnight or the time between sunset and dawn. Certain dates, Sanzianil, Midsummer, Noaptia de Sant'Andre, St. Andrew's Night, and the winter solstice, were believed to thin the barrier between the human world and the spirit realm, making Strigoi more powerful. 4. Psychological manipulation. In some tales, Strigoi can create illusions, enter dreams, or cause hallucinations. They may tempt a living relative or lover into maintaining emotional contact, thereby stealing life little by little. 5. Social and moral transgression. Often, the Strigoi functions as a moral exemplary figure. Those who violate taboo, commit grave sins, refuse charity, practice deceit, or die without reconciliation risk becoming Strigoi. Thus, the folklore serves as an implicit behavioral code for the community. Social role and symbolism. Though terrifying, Strigoi serve crucial symbolic purposes in Romanian village life. Explaining illness and misfortune. Before the rise of scientific explanations for disease, unexplained sickness, crop failure, or livestock mortality needed a tangible narrative. Strigoi provided that explanation. They were agents of disorder who threatened the community's fragile balance. Control through ritual. Belief in Strigoi offered psychological comfort. If harm had a supernatural cause, it could also have a supernatural cure. Rituals gave villagers a sense of control in a world filled with unpredictable dangers such as famine or plague. Boundary between life and death. Much Strigoi lore reflects a fundamental anxiety. What if death is not final? What if the soul, unable to depart, becomes a corrosive presence? Unlike Western Gothic literature, which often romanticizes the vampire as an individualistic rebel, Romanian folklore presents the Strigoi as a communal malfunction, a disruption of social and cosmic harmony. When a Strigoi arises, it is a sign that the community has failed in some aspect: burial, justice, morality, or spiritual order. Otherness and scapegoating. In times of crisis, communities sometimes search for Strigoi among marginalized neighbors, those who behaved strangely, violated norms, or appeared physically different. This reflects the universal human tendency to locate external causes for internal anxieties, similar to witch hunts in Western Europe. Rituals of protection and prevention. Romanian folklore preserves an extensive range of defensive practices. These rituals are not simply superstitious formulas, they represent the interplay of Christianity with ancient folk magic. 1. Burial customs. To prevent a deceased person from rising as a Strigoi, villagers employed several customs. Placing garlic or frankincense in the coffin. Spiking the body with a nail or thorn. Tying the big toes together to prevent walking. Placing a coin or small cross in the mouth. Sprinkling holy water liberally over the corpse. Garlic is particularly emblematic of Romanian Strigoi lore. Its strong smell and apotropaic symbolism made it a powerful multi-purpose charm against evil forces. 2. Vigil at the wake. The nights between death and burial were believed dangerous. Family members stayed awake beside the body to prevent the spirit from wandering. Candles, prayers, and hymns created a protective space. 3. Anti-Strigoi rituals. If a community suspected that a revenant was active, a ritual investigation took place. This involved exhuming the corpse to look for signs such as fresh blood at the mouth, rosy cheeks or flexible limbs, unusually intact body tissue, repositioned limbs. If these appeared, villagers performed one of several measures: removing and burning the heart, driving a stake through the chest, turning the corpse face down, sprinkling holy water and reinterring. These acts may seem gruesome today, but in pre-modern rural life they symbolize the sealing of a spiritual breach. 4. Household protections. Village households used herbs, crosses, and animal symbols to ward off Strigoi. Garlic hung on doors or windows, iron tools placed near sleeping children, and ritual circles drawn during St. Andrew's night were common practices. The Strigoi and the vampire connection. Modern vampire mythology often assumes that Bram Stoker's Dracula is directly based on Romanian Strigoi. While there is overlap, the connection is less literal than popular retellings suggest. Stoker gathered many of his ideas from Western European sources, but he incorporated Transylvanian elements through travel writings and ethnographic accounts. The Romanian imagination contributed key motifs: blood drinking, rising from the grave, night wandering, but the literary vampire is much more aristocratic and romanticized than the folkloric Strigoi. What the Strigoi contributes to the vampire mythos is authentic rural depth. It represents a creature rooted in communal fear, not personal seduction, in agriculture and village morality, not Gothic mansions. The Strigoi's portrayal of energy theft, disease, and social deviance shaped Europe's broader vampire traditions indirectly, reminding us that horror is deeply cultural, not merely universal. Strigoi in modern Romania. Today, Strigoi still appear in rural storytelling, though the belief no longer holds the same literal power. Festivals, folklore museums, TV dramas, and internet culture have revitalized interest. Some communities continue to perform remnants of anti-Strigoi rituals, particularly around major holidays such as Sanzine or St. Andrew's Night. These practices survive mostly as cultural heritage rather than fear-based necessity. Modern Romanians view Strigoi with a blend of pride and fascination. They symbolize a connection to ancestors, a reminder of a world where life was fragile, nature was mysterious, and the boundary between the living and the dead was perceived as permeable. Psychological and cultural interpretation. Scholars studying Strigoi emphasize several interpretive frameworks. 1. Psychological projection. The Strigoi represents anxiety about loss, grief, and death. When illness strikes or a loved one dies prematurely, folklore provides a narrative to process emotional trauma. 2. Social order. Strigoi myths help regulate behavior. Those who act selfishly, violate hospitality norms, or refuse reconciliation risk being labeled after death as restless spirits. 3. Symbol of liminality. Strigoi inhabit thresholds, between life and death, human and animal, night and day. They embody the fear and fascination of being in between states, a recurring theme in world mythology. 4. Memory of the marginalized. Strigoi lore often centers around individuals who deviated from social expectations, outsiders, the mentally ill, the deformed, or the misunderstood. Thus, the myth preserves collective memories of people who lived on the fringes of society. Why the Strigoi endures. The persistence of Strigoi folklore stems from its emotional resonance. These creatures articulate fears of abandonment, betrayal, disease, and moral failure. They explain the unexplainable in intimate, culturally relevant terms. Even when literal belief fades, the storytelling remains compelling because it speaks to universal human concerns: the fate of the soul, the fragility of life, and the consequences of wrongdoing. Here is a concise breakdown to clarify the main ideas. Strigoi are supernatural beings from Romanian folklore, similar to vampires but broader in meaning. They come in two main types. Strigoi 7, living witches or people with spiritual powers who drain energy at night. Strigoi Morti, undead revenants who rise from graves, sometimes linked to vampire stories. Their origins combine ancient Dacian, Roman, and Slavic myths about souls, owls, and restless dead. Strigoi can shapeshift, leave their bodies, drain vitality, not only blood, and cause misfortune. Communities used rituals, garlic, holy water, burial customs, to prevent or defeat them. The Strigoi serves as a cultural explanation for illness, tragedy, or moral deviation. They influenced vampire legends but remain more rustic, symbolic, and community-focused. Today they survive as folklore, cultural heritage, and a symbol of Romania's mythic past. The line of Lilith, various occult traditions. Few figures in Western esotericism are as multifaceted as Lilith. To some she is a demoness, to others a goddess, to still others an archetype of rebellion, sexuality, and primordial night. In multiple occult traditions, Jewish mysticism, medieval demonology, Renaissance magic, modern witchcraft, ceremonial magic, and contemporary left-hand path systems, the idea of the line of Lilith arises in various forms. Sometimes it denotes a spiritual lineage, sometimes a metaphysical current, and sometimes a symbolic path of self-transformation. Although these traditions differ dramatically, they share a common thread. Lilith represents a boundary-crossing force, and the line associated with her marks a movement across the edges of the ordinary toward the shadowed, the autonomous, and the forbidden. What follows is an exploration, not an endorsement of magical practice, of how different occult systems conceptualize the line of Lilith, what symbolic meanings it carries, and how the figure of Lilith evolves as it travels through history. 1. Lilith in ancient and early sources, the primordial line. To understand any occult line of Lilith, one must first understand her earliest forms. These early sources do not use the phrase line of Lilith, but they create the mythic foundation from which later esoteric lineages draw meaning. Mesopotamian roots. Lilith's lineage begins long before she enters Jewish folklore. In Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts appear beings known as Lilu, Lilitu, and Adat Lili, spirits associated with storms, desolation, illness, and sexuality. They are not necessarily evil, they are ambivalent, nocturnal forces. This earliest line is not genealogical but mythic. Lilith emerges from the ancient wind spirit complex, a cluster of beings tied to the desert, abandoned places, and liminality. Occultists who reference a line of Lilith often claim that her power stems from this primordial, pre-moral nature. The alphabet of Ben Sira and the first woman motif. Lilith enters Jewish folklore most famously in the medieval alphabet of Ben Sira, where she appears as Adam's first wife who refuses subordination. This introduces two enduring themes: autonomy and rebellion against imposed order. Sexuality as a locus of power. In later occult traditions, these themes become essential markers of the line of Lilith. Where she walks, structures break, hierarchies dissolve, and personal sovereignty becomes central. 2. Kabbalistic and Jewish mystical traditions, the left side lineage. Kabbalah develops one of the most complex esoteric portraits of Lilith. Here the line of Lilith becomes associated with the Sitra Ara, the other side, or the realm of unbalanced forces. Lilith and the Qliphoth. In Kabbalistic cosmology, the Qliphoth are the husks, shadow counterparts to the Sephiro of the Tree of Life. Lilith is often linked to the Qliphothic sphere of Gamaliel, associated with illusion, dreams, lunar phantasmagoria, and seduction. The line of Lilith in this context refers to the path of the left side, the left pillar, in its unbalanced form. The lineage of nocturnal female demonic figures. The flow of energy associated with sexuality, shadow, and inversion. Although Kabbalah does not endorse following this path, indeed, it warns against it, 20th century occultists adopt it as a metaphysical current. Lilith as the consort of Samhael. Another crucial idea is the union between Lilith and Samhael, the dark reflection of Adam and Eve. Their pairing symbolizes the shadow of creation, the inverted tree, the nocturnal generative force. The line of Lilith, therefore, may refer to the energetic or symbolic descent from this union, a lineage of beings, forces, or archetypes that emanate from an inverted cosmology. Some occultists interpret this line psychologically as the confrontation with the hidden feminine shadow. 3. Medieval and Renaissance demonology, the Lilith line as demonological descent. In medieval grimoires, Lilith appears within demonological hierarchies. These texts often list demons in genealogical lines, such as the lineage of a specific infernal ruler. Lilith as mother of demons. In certain demonological lore, Lilith is said to be the mother of Lilim, a host of night spirits or demonic offspring. Renaissance demonologists, influenced by both folklore and Kabbalah, treat this as an actual line. The line of Lilith becomes a brood of beings linked to erotic temptation, dreams, and nocturnal paralysis. Her line includes succubi and spirits of the night, representing uncontrolled desire or disruptive feminine power. While these accounts use heavy moral judgment, later esotericists reinterpret this line more neutrally as a symbolic current of liberated or taboo energy. 4. Western ceremonial magic, the lunar and shadow current. Renaissance and 19th century ceremonial magic offers a very different view. Here, the line of Lilith is not a literal bloodline but an energetic stream linked to the moon's darker aspects. The lunar lineage. In Hermetic and Rosicrucian-influenced systems, Lilith is associated with the black moon, the rejected feminine, the subconscious and dream work, the astral realm. In this context, the line of Lilith means a magical path of working with the hidden lunar current. Engagement with the backside of the tree of life, the Carpathian shadow. Exploration of erotic symbolism as transformative rather than sinful. Magicians of this period generally used Lilith symbolically, not literally, as a force representing the hidden, the taboo, and the unintegrated. 5. Modern occultism and witchcraft, the line of Lilith as feminist and shadow archetype. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Lilith becomes a central figure in certain forms of neo-paganism, feminist witchcraft, Jungian esotericism, and psychological magic. Here, the line of Lilith shifts meaning again. Lilith in goddess-centered traditions. Some neo-pagan traditions elevate Lilith to the status of dark moon goddess, wild feminine archetype, symbol of personal sovereignty. The line may refer to a spiritual lineage of practitioners who revere Lilith, a metaphorical path of reclaiming suppressed aspects of self, a devotion to autonomy, sexuality, and shadow work. Again, this is symbolic rather than literal. Lilith in Jungian esotericism. In psychological interpretations, Lilith represents the repressed shadow of the feminine, non-conforming sexuality, anger, independence, and self-ownership. In this context, the line of Lilith is the personal psychological path of confronting the shadow feminine within oneself, a symbolic heritage of those who step outside cultural norms. This interpretation is widely used in modern occult literature, transforming Lilith from a feared figure into a powerful archetype of individuation. 6. The left-hand path, LHP, the line of Lilith as dark feminine current. In contemporary left-hand path traditions, such as certain strains of Satanism, Luciferianism, Carpathic magic, and modern demonolatry, Lilith is often regarded as a dark goddess, a queen of the night, or an embodiment of antinomian sovereignty. Here, the line of Lilith frequently refers to a magical current. Certain LHP authors describe Lilith as embodying a current of self-liberation from imposed morality, erotic transformation, shadow empowerment, rebellion against cosmic hierarchy. The line is not genealogical but energetic, a flow of magical and psychological power associated with Lilith's attributes. B. A mythic or initiatory line. In some LHP traditions, practitioners speak of initiating through the line of Lilith, meaning undergoing personal transformation through confrontation with shadow and desire, integrating autonomy, sensuality, and introspective darkness, embracing the symbolic night side as part of self-deification. This does not imply real occult inheritance, it is a metaphor for a tradition of ideas. C. A symbol of antinomian feminine power. Many LHP authors place Lilith alongside figures like Ishtar, Nama, Hecate, Kali, the Morrigan. These associations form a mythic lineage of dark feminine powers, though historically they are unrelated. In symbolic systems, however, they form a line of resonant archetypes, powerful, dangerous, transformative, boundary crossing. 7. The astrological line of Lilith, the black moon and shadow psyche. Modern astrology introduces another dimension. Black moon Lilith, the lunar apogee point, is said to represent unresolved wounds around autonomy, repressed sexuality, fierce independence, shadow aspects of desire. In astrology, the line of Lilith can mean a trajectory in the natal chart that highlights issues related to rebellion, rejection, or empowerment. A symbolic path of confronting societal constraints. This concept is metaphorical and psychological, not metaphysical. 8. Interpretive themes across traditions. Despite the variation in meaning, several consistent themes emerge across the occult landscape. 1. Autonomy and refusal of subjugation. From the alphabet of Ben Sira to feminist witchcraft, Lilith embodies the refusal to obey unjust hierarchy. 2. The shadow feminine. Lilith often represents the suppressed aspects of womanhood, or in a broader sense, feminine-coded energies, such as anger, erotic power, boundary setting, and nocturnal intuition. 3. Liminality and transgression. She crosses boundaries, between human and demon, day and night, sexuality and danger, order and chaos. 4. Dream, night, and unconsciousness. In Kabbalah and ceremonial magic, Lilith is tied to the dream realm, illusion, and the unintegrated subconscious. 5. Inversion and the other side. In left-hand path systems, Lilith's line is an antinomian path that inverts norms and explores taboo spaces. Across all traditions, the line of Lilith is symbolic, not a literal genetic or spiritual bloodline. It refers to an idea, an energy, a mythic trajectory, or a current of transformative symbolism associated with Lilith. 9. Why the concept persists: Lilith as a living archetype. The ongoing interest in Lilith stems from her adaptability. She is not fixed, she evolves with cultural needs. In ancient Mesopotamia, she embodied desert winds and nocturnal spirits. In medieval Jewish texts, she expressed anxieties about sexuality and social order. In feminist spirituality, she symbolizes autonomy and equality. In psychological occultism, she is the shadow we must confront to become whole. In LHP traditions, she becomes a figure of liberation, empowerment, and self-directed transformation. Thus, the line of Lilith can be interpreted as the evolving chain of meanings that trail behind her through history. The line of Lilith, though it appears in different forms, is essentially the mythic, symbolic, and esoteric trajectory of Lilith's influence across cultures and centuries. Whether interpreted through Jewish mysticism, demonology, ceremonial magic, neo-paganism, astrology, or left-hand path thought, this line marks a path through the shadowed spaces of autonomy, sexuality, power, and self-confrontation. It is not a literal lineage or an actionable magical method, it is a conceptual lineage, a symbolic current carried forward by generations of storytellers, occultists, and seekers. In this sense, the line of Lilith is not a single tradition. It is the continuum of human attempts to understand the darker, more liberated aspects of the feminine, the night, and the self, a line stretching from ancient winds of the desert to the modern exploration of personal identity and shadow. The Carpathian line, Bram Stoker and later Gothic fiction. The Carpathian Mountains have long occupied a privileged position in the Western imagination, remote, forbidding, and steeped in ancient cultural memory. Yet it was Bram Stoker, through Dracula, 1897, who transformed the Carpathians into one of the most recognizable symbolic landscapes of the Gothic. His depiction of a frontier zone, between East and West, science and superstition, civilization and the archaic, created what might be called a Carpathian line, a conceptual, narrative, and symbolic boundary that persists across later Gothic fiction. This essay examines how Stoker constructs this line, how it functions within the Gothic's evolving preoccupation with borders and transgression, and how later writers reinterpret, critique, or complicate it. Ultimately, the Carpathian line becomes a lens through which the Gothic articulates anxieties about modernity, empire, race, and the supernatural. The Carpathian line as threshold and liminal zone. In Dracula, the Carpathians initially appear as a threshold space. Jonathan Harker's journey from London into Transylvania dramatizes a descent into otherness, marked by a progressive weakening of modern rationality. As he moves eastward, the physical environment becomes increasingly uncanny. Wolves howl at the coach, peasants cross themselves, and the roads deteriorate. Stoker uses these incremental details to stage the Carpathians as a transitional frontier, a place where the certainties of Victorian knowledge begin to unravel. This threshold quality is foundational to the Gothic, which often situates terror at points of contact between incompatible epistemologies. The Carpathian line is thus more than a geographical setting, it is a symbolic border. Once Harker crosses it, the laws of nature bend, linear time becomes unstable, and Enlightenment reason proves inadequate. This border marks the edge of the known world but also the outer limit of Victorian cultural authority. In this regard, Stoker's Carpathians echo earlier Gothic uses of foreign locales as zones of disruption, yet he sharpens the motif by anchoring it in contemporary anxieties about empire and degeneracy. Stoker's Carpathians and the politics of Eastern Europe. Stoker's representation of the region is inseparable from fin de siècle British concerns about Eastern Europe as a site of danger, backwardness, and political instability. Dracula's genealogy, stretching back to ancient warrior nobility, casts him simultaneously as archaic aristocrat and undead remnant of feudal violence. His ability to infiltrate Britain dramatizes fears of contamination and reverse colonization. This political dimension extends to the landscape itself. The Carpathian Mountains become a kind of geopolitical imaginary, a vast and shadowy hinterland from which threatening forces emerge. Yet Stoker's portrayal is not simply xenophobic, it also expresses a fascination with the vitality, mystery, and historical depth attributed to the East. The Carpathian line functions as a frontier across which the West encounters its own buried desires and anxieties. Later Gothic authors inherit this geopolitical tension but often revise or subvert it. Some critique Stoker's Orientalist assumptions, others embrace the region's uncanny potency. In all cases, the Carpathians operate as a symbolic reservoir for Gothic anxieties that evolve alongside political and cultural shifts. Time, memory, and the deep past. One of the most influential aspects of Stoker's Carpathian line is its relationship to time. For Stoker, the Carpathians are not merely spatially distant, they are temporally distant. Harker repeatedly observes that the region feels centuries removed from the modern world. Count Dracula's castle embodies this sense of temporal displacement, medieval in structure, yet animated by a supernatural presence that confounds linear chronology. This temporal layering becomes a key Gothic strategy in later works. Authors draw upon the Carpathian line to evoke spaces where history accumulates rather than progresses, where the dead exert influence over the living. Such spaces challenge the modern belief in continuous advancement. Instead, they suggest a cyclical, haunted, or recursive temporality. Writers such as Angela Carter, Elizabeth Kostova, and even contemporary horror authors adapt this temporal dissonance to explore questions of cultural memory, suppressed histories, and inherited trauma. The Carpathian line becomes a portal to the deep past, rendering modern characters vulnerable to forces shaped by centuries of violence or loss. The supernatural and the scientific, a border in crisis. Stoker's Carpathians mark not only a border of geography and time but also a border between scientific rationality and the supernatural. The Victorian period was characterized by dramatic advances in technology, medicine, and communications, and Dracula famously foregrounds these innovations: typewriters, phonographs, blood transfusions, even as it reintroduces superstition and folklore. The collision between these epistemologies is orchestrated through the Carpathian line. In London, Dracula appears as a mysterious foreigner, but in the Carpathians, the natural order itself bends to his will. The region becomes a pocket of unruly metaphysics, a reminder that science cannot fully explain the world. Gothic fiction after Stoker frequently employs similar boundary spaces to interrogate the limits of empirical knowledge. In post-Stoker works, this border often becomes more ambiguous. Rather than casting the Carpathians as a stark antithesis to modernity, later Gothic fiction may portray them as sites of hybrid knowledge systems, where superstition and reason coexist, or where local folklore contains truths that science overlooks. This shift reflects broader cultural changes, including skepticism about Western epistemological dominance, gender, sexuality, and the Eastern European other. The Carpathian line is also deeply tied to Gothic constructions of gender and sexuality. Stoker's depiction of the vampiric women in Dracula's castle, seductive, predatory, and transgressive, locates sexual threat beyond the border of British propriety. Their unrestrained desire contrasts with the Victorian ideal of feminine purity, and the Carpathians become a symbolic space for the eruption of taboo impulses. Later Gothic fiction both inherits and critiques this sexualized exoticism. Some authors, especially in feminist Gothic writing, reimagine the Carpathian line as a site of liberation rather than corruption. The erotic charge that Stoker frames as monstrous can be reframed as a challenge to patriarchal constraints. At the same time, other works preserve the association between Eastern Europe and dangerous eroticism but complicate it by exploring queer desire, ambivalence, and power dynamics. In all cases, the Carpathian line remains a fertile territory for negotiating the Gothic's enduring interest in forbidden or destabilized forms of sexuality. The Carpathian castle and its architectural echoes. Dracula's castle is the architectural emblem of the Carpathian line. Perched on a precarious cliff, accessible only by a winding path, the castle epitomizes the Gothic trope of the isolated fortress. Yet its power in later literature lies in its ambiguous status. It is both a home and a prison, a locus of aristocratic heritage and a site of decay, a stronghold of supernatural power and a relic of a dying social order. Later Gothic authors frequently draw upon this architectural vocabulary. Castles, monasteries, abandoned fortresses, and remote estates throughout Eastern Europe appear in 20th and 21st century fiction as echoes of Stoker's model. The Carpathian line thus becomes not only a geographical boundary but also an architectural one, signifying structures that resist contemporary norms of transparency, mobility, and technological openness. Some modern authors invert the trope, situating Terra not in a medieval fortress but in modern structures, research facilities, Cold War bunkers, contemporary hotels, that nonetheless occupy the same symbolic boundary zone. In such works, the Carpathian line continues to signify architectural opacity and violent histories embedded in the built environment. The Carpathian line in post-Gothic and neo-Gothic fiction. As Gothic fiction evolved into the 20th and 21st centuries, the Carpathian line persisted across various subgenres. In supernatural thrillers, the region retains its associations with ancient evil. In psychological or postmodern Gothic, it becomes a metaphorical space where the boundaries of identity destabilize. For example, Elizabeth Kostova's The Historian, 2005, explicitly returns to the Carpathian landscape, intertwining Stoker's legacy with Cold War tensions and academic research. Here, the Carpathian line becomes a palimpsest of political trauma, from Ottoman rule to Soviet surveillance. The supernatural threat is inseparable from the bureaucratic violence of modern empires. Similarly, in horror and dark fantasy, authors employ the Carpathians as a backdrop for stories involving folkloric creatures, occult practices, or buried secrets. The region's rich folklore, Varsale, Strigoi, and local legends, provides fertile ground for narratives seeking a Gothic rooted in cultural specificity rather than generic exoticism. In these texts, the Carpathian line is reconfigured not as an east or west binary but as a locus of cultural resilience and narrative multiplicity. Critique and reclamation, post-colonial and regional voices. In recent decades, writers from Eastern Europe have reshaped the Carpathian line from within. Rather than accepting Stoker's representation of the region as backward or uncanny, these authors interrogate the colonial gaze embedded in Western Gothic tradition. They often present the Carpathians as culturally rich, historically nuanced, and politically complex. Such works reclaim the landscape from its reductive Western image. The supernatural may remain, but it is framed through local perspectives that complicate the notion of the region as an alien other. The Carpathian line thus becomes a site of cultural reconstruction, challenging the asymmetries of representation that underpinned earlier Gothic texts. By shifting authority over the narrative space, these writers contribute to a broader transformation of the Gothic, one that questions who has the power to define monstrosity, authenticity, or cultural meaning. The Carpathian line as metaphor, borders in the contemporary Gothic. In the most recent wave of Gothic fiction, the Carpathian line often appears not as a physical location but as a metaphor for any boundary where identity, knowledge, or power becomes unstable. Authors transpose its symbolic framework onto entirely new geographies, urban peripheries, digital spaces, ecological frontiers, while preserving its core function as a site of liminality. This migration of the Carpathian line reflects a fundamental truth of the Gothic. Its preoccupation with borders is also a preoccupation with crises. The Carpathians, once imagined as Europe's shadowed edge, now represent the psychological and socio-political edges of the contemporary world: migration, displacement, environmental degradation, cultural fragmentation. In such contexts, the Carpathian line stands for a threshold at which the familiar world threatens to dissolve. The enduring power of the Carpathian line. Bram Stoker's contribution to Gothic fiction extends far beyond the figure of Dracula. His imaginative mapping of the Carpathian frontier created a powerful symbolic geography that continues to shape the genre. The Carpathian line remains a site of imaginative possibility, a borderland where rationality falters, where the past resurfaces, and where cultural anxieties assume supernatural form. Later Gothic and Neo-Gothic authors have expanded, critiqued, and reinterpreted this line, transforming it into a flexible and resonant motif. Whether invoked as geopolitical frontier, site of erotic transgression, architectural symbol, or metaphor for psychological liminality, the Carpathian line endures because it encapsulates the Gothic's essential engagement with boundaries and their collapse. The Masquerade clans, world of darkness. In Vampire, the Masquerade, clans are the great vampiric lineages descended from Cain's childer. Each clan carries a signature curse, distinct disciplines, and a cultural style that shapes how its members navigate life. Clans are political groups, supernatural bloodlines, and cultural identities all at once. To understand the world of darkness, you must understand its clans, because every city's struggle for power, secrecy, survival, and damnation stems from their interactions. What follows is a detailed, lore-grounded explanation of each major clan, their roles in knightly society, and the thematic ideas they represent. Bruja. The Bruja are the rebels of vampiric society, philosophers turned punks, idealists turned insurgents. In ancient nights they were once known as a clan of passionate philosopher kings, guiding mortal civilizations and cultivating knowledge. Over time, their chaos, an uncontrollable rage lurking beneath the surface, led them from enlightened debate to violent uprising. Now they are infamous for their short tempers, their rebellious streak, and their tendency to challenge authority wherever they find it. In modern nights, Bruja gather in counterculture scenes, activist groups, anarch domains, or any place where oppression can be punched in the face. Their disciplines, potence, celerity, and presence, make them charismatic bruisers who can inspire crowds or tear through enemies in seconds. While some kindred see them as little more than angry thugs, the Bruja remain true to their oldest ideal, that the world can and should be better, and that sometimes, only revolution can achieve it. Gangrel. The Gangrel are the loners, wanderers, and shapeshifters of vampiric society. They are deeply tied to the wilderness, and many prefer the company of beasts over the politics of the undead. Their reputation is one of rugged independence and primal fury. When they fight, their beast comes forward with terrifying clarity. When they flee, they vanish as effortlessly as smoke. Gangrel disciplines, animalism, fortitude, and protean, give them the ability to command animals, survive harsher conditions, and literally reshape their bodies. Their protean gifts include claws, melding into earth, and shifting into animal forms. The Gangrel weakness is a reflection of their inner wildness. When they lose control, they acquire animalistic traits that linger, marking them as becoming more beast than vampire. Although they were once nominally loyal to the Camarilla, the Gangrel are famously unpredictable, sometimes abandoning sect politics entirely to roam the open world. They represent the themes of instinct, freedom, the call of the wild, and the thin line between humanity and the beast. Malkavians. The Malkavians are the mad seers of the undead. Their curse is a form of supernatural insanity. Each member suffers some manner of psychological instability. But this curse is also a mirror for prophecy. Many Malkavians see deeper truths, receiving visions, intuitions, or fragmented glimpses of hidden realities. Despite their unhinged reputations, Malkavians possess sharp intellects, uncanny insights, and a disturbing empathy for the truths that others refuse to confront. Their disciplines, dominate, auspex, and obfuscate, symbolize their paradoxical nature, controlling minds even while their own fracturing, seeing truths others miss, and disappearing from sight when their presence is too disruptive. Modern Malkavians often play the role of tricksters, prophets, therapists, or chaotic neutral elements in vampiric society. They reveal truths in ways that appear nonsensical, but their nonsense often conceals profound meaning. They are a reminder that the world of darkness is not merely political but metaphysical, and that the human mind is fragile when exposed to its horrors. Nosferatu. The Nosferatu are the clan cursed with monstrous physical deformity. Their embrace warps their bodies into grotesque shapes, ranging from subtly unsettling to inhumanly horrific, which forces them to dwell underground, in sewers or abandoned structures. Yet what they lose in appearance, they gain in cunning and information. Nosferatu disciplines, obfuscate, animalism, and potence, make them silent watchers, powerful survivors, and allies of vermin. Most of all, Nosferatu are information brokers. They collect secrets relentlessly, trading them for power or safety. Few clans are as tightly knit. Since society rejects them, they form their own hidden network. Their horror film appearance belies deeply human characteristics: loyalty, pragmatism, and a desire to survive with dignity. Nosferatu represent the theme that monstrosity is not always visible on the outside, and sometimes those most obviously marked by the curse retain the most humanity. Toreador. Called degenerates, artistes, or even sirens, the Toreador are the aesthetes of the undead world. They are driven by beauty, art, music, performance, fashion, passion, or even the beauty of schemes. They were once the patrons of medieval courts. Today they haunt galleries, nightclubs, startups, and cultural hotspots. Their clan curse is obsession. When confronted with overwhelming beauty, whether a piece of art or a moment in time, a toreador can become entranced, losing themselves in the experience. Their disciplines, celerity, presence, and auspex, make them fast, alluring, and able to perceive beauty that others miss. Though often dismissed as shallow, toreador understand that beauty is power. Culture shapes the modern world, and toreador are its nocturnal sculptors. They champion the idea that immortality is meaningless without aesthetic experience, and that seduction can be deadlier than claws or politics. Tremere. The Tremere are the arcane sorcerers of the vampire world. They began as mortal mags who used forbidden rituals to steal vampirism and reshape themselves into a clan. Their arrogance nearly doomed them, but through discipline, hierarchy, and blood practice, they forged a place within the Camarilla. Tremere disciplines include auspex, dominate, and, most importantly, blood sorcery, also known as thaumaturgy. This makes them fearsome supernatural scholars capable of performing rituals others can hardly comprehend. Their internal structure is rigid, almost cult-like, and includes pyramidal ranks, oaths of loyalty, and strict tutoring. The Tremere curse is their dependency on blood hierarchies. Historically, they were all bound to their elders. Although modern knights have weakened these structures, the clan remains shaped by expertise, secrecy, and ambition. Tremere symbolize the dangers of forbidden knowledge, the costs of power, and the thin line between science and sorcery. Ventru. Often called the kings or blue bloods, the Ventru are the rulers of the kindred world. They gravitate toward leadership, corporate, political, military, or aristocratic. Where Bruja challenge systems, Ventru build them. Where toreadors seek beauty, Ventru seek stability. They are the architects of the Camarilla's Masquerade system, the laws that keep vampires hidden from mortals. Their disciplines, dominate, fortitude, and presence, make them natural leaders with unbreakable wills. Yet their curse is one of taste. They can feed only on a very narrow category of mortals, such as veterans, artists, the devout, or another specific demographic. This exclusivity reinforces their identity as selective aristocrats. Ventru are often portrayed as cold, strategic, and authoritarian, but many sincerely believe they are protecting the world, both mortal and undead, from chaos. They represent hierarchy, order, responsibility, and the burden of command. La Sombra. The La Sombra are the lords of darkness, literally, as they command shadows through the discipline of oblivion, formerly obtenebration. The La Sombra embody the theme of predatory aristocracy. Historically, they led the Sabbat, imposing a philosophy of survival by domination. Unlike the Ventru, who rule by law and order, the La Sombra rule by strength and fear. The La Sombra curse is their absence of reflection. Mirrors, cameras, and even recordings fail to capture them fully, eroding their sense of identity and reminding them constantly of the metaphysical void at their core. Their disciplines, dominate, oblivion, and potence, make them formidable in both shadow and politics. In recent lore, a faction of La Sombra has defected to the Camarilla, seeking legitimacy and stability. Their struggle between tradition and adaptation underscores their central theme: power must have purpose, or it becomes empty. Tsimis. The Tsimis are the flesh-crafters, nobles of terror, and metaphysical philosophers of the Sabbat. The clan's signature discipline, vicissitude, allows them to sculpt flesh and bone into new forms, altering themselves or others in grotesquely creative ways. Some Tsimis treat it like an art form, others use it to torment their enemies. Their curse is tied to territoriality. They must sleep surrounded by soil from their homeland or a place deeply symbolic to them. Without it, they weaken and risk torpor. This emphasizes their themes of roots, legacy, and the meaning of home. While many Tsimis are sadistic monsters, others are scholars in the truest sense, exploring the nature of identity, the soul, and the evolution of vampirism. They represent transformation, beautiful or horrific, and the idea that immortality demands reinvention. Ravnos. The Ravnos are the tricksters and wanderers of the kindred world. Historically nomadic and mistrusted, they are feared for their discipline of chymistry, which creates illusions so convincing they can deceive all senses. Ravnos use illusion not merely as deception but as a philosophical statement: reality is malleable, and perception is power. Their curse compels them toward a particular vice: compulsion, theft, trickery, or another self-destructive impulse. This flaw makes them unpredictable and forces them to face the consequences of their compulsions again and again. Canonically, the Ravnos suffered near annihilation in the Week of Nightmares, but modern games reinterpret or rebuild the clan. They symbolize impermanence, wanderlust, and the idea that the world is a stage in which truth and illusion intertwine. Setite's Ministry. Once called the followers of Set, now often known as the Ministry, this clan worships, or claims to worship, the Egyptian god Set. They embrace themes of corruption, liberation, temptation, and forbidden knowledge. Their disciplines, obfuscate, presence, and oblivion, or serpentis in older editions, allow them to manipulate minds, transform into serpentine forms, and corrupt hearts. Their curse is sunlight sensitivity beyond that of other clans, reinforcing their symbolic connection to darkness and secrecy. Setites believe that society traps mortals and kindred alike in chains, and that by breaking these chains through temptation or corruption, they reveal truth. In recent lore, the Ministry has repositioned itself as a global network of smugglers, spiritual revolutionaries, and agents of temptation. They represent the idea that freedom can be dangerous, and that corruption often begins with a whisper. Assamites, Bonu Hakim. Historically feared as vampire assassins, the Bonu Hakim were once a clan hired to enforce justice or vengeance upon their own kind. While this role was exaggerated by propaganda, they do follow a code of justice rooted in their founder Hakim. Their disciplines, celerity, obfuscate, and blood sorcery, make them swift, stealthy, and magically dangerous. Their traditional curse was an addiction to vampiric vitae, feeding on other vampires' wrist frenzy or spiritual corruption. In modern lore, this curse has been altered or lifted, allowing the Bonu Hakim to join the Camarilla as a legitimate clan. They represent justice, vengeance, self-discipline, and the danger of judging others without confronting one's own darkness. Giovanni Hecata. The Giovanni were a merchant family turned necromantic clan, infamous for their ruthless embrace practices and cold familial politics. Their signature discipline, oblivion, formerly necromancy, allows them to command the dead, manipulate ghosts, and pierce the veil between the living world and the underworld. Their curse is visceral, their kiss causes pain rather than pleasure. This reinforces their thematic identity: death is not indulgent, but grim and frightening. In modern lore, the Giovanni have merged with other necromantic bloodlines, Harawites, Cappadocians, Samedi, into a unified clan called the Hecata. This new affiliation emphasizes death, memory, lineage, and the confrontation with mortality. Clans are more than game mechanics, they are the philosophical pillars of vampire, the Masquerade. Each clan explores a facet of what it means to be a monster wearing the mask of humanity: power, passion, madness, corruption, rebellion, beauty, knowledge, tradition, evolution, and death. Together, they create the complex, tragic ecosystem of the world of darkness, where every vampire's undead identity is shaped, and often doomed, by the bloodline they inherit. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed exploring the most powerful vampire bloodlines across myth and fiction, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into supernatural lore. Tell us in the comments which clan you think rules the night, or if we missed a bloodline deserving of the spotlight. Share this video with fellow horror fans and keep the discussion going. Your support helps us bring more dark legends, eerie histories, and hidden stories to life. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and beware what stalks the shadows. See you in the next video.